Eisenhower's calm that hit a world on the brink. He spoke softly while the world held its breath. Behind measured words sat weapons that could end everything. Calm became the most dangerous performance of all. Dwight Eisenhower entered the presidency with something few leaders ever possess: the trust of victory. He had commanded the largest military force in history and brought a global war to an end. Americans believed that if anyone understood peace, it was him. And that belief allowed something unprecedented to happen. The most heavily armed era in human history would be guided by a man determined to make restraint look effortless. To understand Eisenhower's presidency, we must look beyond the surface of composure, the golf games, the steady speeches, the grandfatherly image, because beneath that calm lived constant calculation, the kind that never sleeps, the kind that assumed catastrophe is always one misstep away. The world Eisenhower inherited was not at peace. It was frozen. Two superpowers stared at each other across continents, armed with weapons that no longer measured victory in territory, but in extinction. Nuclear war was no longer theoretical. It was logistical, planned, timetabled, waiting. Eisenhower understood this more clearly than anyone. He knew how easily miscommunication escalated, how rapidly momentum overtook reason. He had seen wars begin from misunderstandings and pride. Now those same human flaws were paired with unimaginable force. Publicly, Eisenhower projected reassurance. Privately, he obsessed over control. He questioned generals relentlessly. He resisted pressure to expand arsenals blindly. He rejected emotional responses to provocation. His leadership depended on something counterintuitive, making inaction look strong. Crises arrived anyway. Korea simmered. China rose. The Soviet Union tested weapons that narrowed the margin for error. Advisors pushed for displays of force. Hawks demanded certainty through dominance. Eisenhower listened, then slowed everything down. This was his method: delay escalation, reduce panic, make nuclear war feel unthinkable, even when it was technically possible. Calm was not passive. It was strategic theater designed to buy time, because Eisenhower understood the truth few wanted to face. The next war would not be survived. It would only be prevented, and preventing it required a leader willing to carry fear quietly, so the world did not feel it too sharply. That quiet fear shaped every decision Eisenhower made, even the ones that looked effortless. Behind closed doors, briefings were relentless. Missile gaps, bomber readiness, early warning systems that offered minutes, not hours, to respond. Eisenhower studied each report with the mind of a general and the restraint of a statesman. He knew that preparation could prevent panic, but panic could also justify disaster. Advisors urged expansion. More weapons, more bases, more visible power. Eisenhower resisted the instinct to match fear with fear. He believed excess created its own momentum. An arms race, once unleashed, would never stop on its own. So he slowed it where he could, even when critics accused him of complacency. This restraint did not mean weakness. Eisenhower approved covert actions to avoid open war. He used intelligence and diplomacy as pressure valves. Conflict were managed quietly, kept below the threshold that would force irreversible escalation. The goal was stability, not spectacle. Crises tested this approach repeatedly. In the Middle East, alliances wavered. In Europe, borders trembled. In Asia, revolutions threatened to pull superpowers into direct conflict. Each incident carried nuclear undertones. Each demanded calm faster than fear could spread. Eisenhower understood that leadership in this era meant absorbing anxiety without transmitting it. The public needed confidence. Allies needed reassurance. Enemies needed uncertainty about response, but certainty about restraint. It was a delicate balance. One miscalculation could erase cities. Internally, the cost mounted. Eisenhower worried constantly about accidental war, false alarms, technical failures, human error. He knew the system was only as reliable as the people operating it, and people, under pressure, made mistakes. This was the early conflict of his presidency, not ideology versus ideology, but control versus catastrophe. The challenge of managing power so destructive it demanded humility rather than dominance. The calm he projected was not denial, it was discipline, and the margin for error was shrinking. The pressure intensified as crises overlapped instead of arriving alone. Eisenhower was no longer managing moments. He was managing permanence. By the mid-1950s, nuclear weapons were no longer rare or experimental. They were integrated into strategy, deployed, calculated. The unthinkable was now rehearsed. Military planners spoke in probabilities. Cities became targets on paper. Eisenhower listened to these plans with growing unease. He knew war plans were meant to prevent war, but he also knew how easily preparation turned into temptation. A system designed for deterrence could invite preemption. The more elaborate the machinery became, the more it demanded justification for its existence. The most dangerous moments were the quiet ones. False radar signals, misread intelligence, aggressive maneuvers mistaken for attack. Eisenhower intervened repeatedly, slowing responses, demanding verification, refusing automatic escalation. He distrusted speed. He believed delays saved lives. Political pressure mounted. Critics accused him of relying too heavily on nuclear threats while cutting conventional forces. Others argued he was gambling the world on balance rather than superiority. Eisenhower accepted the criticism without response. Public debate, he believed, could inflame fear faster than policy could correct it. The emotional conflict peaked here. Eisenhower understood that the presidency now carried responsibility for human survival itself, not victory. Survival. He questioned whether any leader should possess such authority, whether deterrence was moral or simply unavoidable. In his final years, he grew more vocal about the danger he saw forming. He warned of a permanent war economy, of alliances between power and profit, of a system that could push leaders toward conflict even when none was intended. These were not abstract concerns. They were personal. Eisenhower had seen what war did to people. He refused to be remembered as the man who allowed the next one to erase everything. The calm never cracked publicly, but internally, the strain was constant. The world stood on the brink, not because leaders wanted war, but because the tools of war had grown beyond human instinct. The resolution came not with peace, but with warning. As Eisenhower prepared to leave office, he chose his final words carefully. He did not celebrate victories. He did not claim triumph. Instead, he cautioned the nation about power, about momentum, about what happens when systems outgrow the people meant to control them. He spoke of a military structure that could shape policy through its own existence, a fear that justified endless preparation, of a world where security depended less on wisdom and more on restraint. It was not a farewell speech. It was an alarm delivered calmly, deliberately, without drama. Eisenhower understood that he could not solve the problem he managed. Nuclear weapons would not disappear. Rivalries would persist. The brink would remain. His success lay in delay, in years bought without catastrophe, in proving that calm leadership could hold the line longer than panic. This was the climax of his presidency. Not a treaty, not a battle, but the decision to speak honestly about the danger of unchecked power. He used his final authority to urge humility in an age of unprecedented force. His story matters because it reframes leadership. Strength, in his era, was not dominance. It was patience. Not reaction, but restraint. Eisenhower showed that survival itself could be an achievement. The presidency he left behind was more powerful than ever, but it also carried a responsibility heavier than any before it. The responsibility to prevent the very tools it commanded from being used. History often remembers the Cold War as a standoff. It should also remember the discipline that kept it cold. Eisenhower's calm did not mean safety. It meant vigilance, and that vigilance remains unfinished. Subscribe to join the journey. Eisenhower